What would you do if you could travel through time? Would you travel to the past and meet up with some of the most important people in history? Would you go to the future to see how human civilization has progressed after 100, 1,000, or even 1,000,000 years? Or would you just go back in time and say, kill Hitler, or go forward to get next week's lottery numbers? These goals, ranging from enlightened to selfish, have long been the topic of fictional works, while the reasons for and methods people use to travel through time has changed considerably over time. Today, I'll be taking a look at the origins of time travel in fiction, at least until some future time traveler goes to the past and creates their own work before anyone else. The earliest stories that could be classified as time travel didn't have people zipping back and forth through time like you'd expect from a modern story. Their vehicle for time travel was, put simply, the passage of time at a different rate than the typical human perspective. Ancient Hindu and Buddhist stories, which are of uncertain dating, but probably were written between 1500 to 2500 years ago, make reference to time passing differently in the heavens than it does on Earth. Thus, a person visiting the heavens for a relatively short time will come back to Earth to find that a great deal more time has passed, which could be construed as a kind of time travel into the future. Sleep was also a popular means of effectively traveling forward in time. Most people are familiar with the story of Rip Van Winkle, who falls asleep and wakes up 20 years later to find his young children to be fully grown adults, among other changes to the world. That famous story was written by Washington Irving in 1819, but sleep as a means of time travel goes back much farther. Again, religion takes the forefront, with ancient tales in the Jewish Talmud and Islamic Quran, the latter based on an earlier Christian legend known as the Seven Sleepers of Ephesus, depicts people falling asleep and waking up decades or even centuries later. There's not much in the record about time travel for a long time after that, which I'll address toward the end of this video. The first modern sleep-based time travel story appears to have come half a century before Rip Van Winkle. In 1771, Louis-Sebastien Mercier wrote a novel that goes by many names, but which I'll refer to as The Year 2440. The story follows an unnamed Frenchman who falls asleep and wakes up several centuries in the future to find a fascinating science-based utopia with no kings, no organized religion, and even no slavery. Unsurprisingly, all this equality didn't sit well with the monarchy, church, and other institutions of France, which wouldn't experience revolution for another 18 years. The novel was quickly banned in France, followed soon afterwards by Spain, thanks to Inquisition, and was even placed on a list of banned books by the Vatican. As is often the case, banned books are extremely popular, and the novel spread throughout Europe, with numerous editions in print and tens of thousands of copies sold by the time of Mercier's death in 1814. Even J.R.R. Tolkien used sleep in this manner, in his narrative that outlined the origins of the dwarves. What, you don't remember time travel in The Lord of the Rings? Maybe that's because sleep-based time travel isn't typically seen as such. Some of those time travel stories are even explained away as dreams, with nothing real about them. Similarly, there are plenty of modern science fiction stories that depict people being placed into a state of suspended animation, i.e. put to sleep, and waking up much later. And in the real world, people can fall into comas and wake up years or even decades later. You could also, in theory, travel close to the speed of light, or near a black hole and effectively travel forward in time. Do all of these count as time travel? To most people, real time travel involves one of two things: travel to the past, or some means of instantaneous travel, either to the past or to the future. So, what were some of the earliest stories utilizing these methods? When it came to time travel, 18th century authors weren't messing around. Mercier sent his protagonist ahead about 700 years, but he would be massively outdone by Danish-Norwegian writer Johan Hermann Wessel just a decade later. In 1781, Wessel wrote the play Anno 7603. As you might expect from the title, a fairy sends a pair of travelers, a man and a woman, forward nearly 6 millennia. The travelers, a pair of lovers, wish that their partners were less typical of their genders. She wishes for him to be more tender and ticklish, while he wishes she were less what is called womanly. When they travel into the future, they find that gender roles are indeed reversed, with women serving as soldiers, while also taking on other, less desirable qualities. One soldier talks of having lecherous ladies' evenings, and warns the male protagonist that he should take care not to be sexually assaulted. Another man, a mild-mannered poet, is said to have suffered domestic violence at the hand of his wife. After their misadventures, the fairy asks if the couple would still like to see each other changed, and they respond in the negative. Unlike the year 2440, Anno 7603 was not well received. The play was never performed, and some biographies of its author remove it from his list of works. Again, given the social norms of the time, it's not hard to see why. Later time travel works like 1889's New Amazonia and 1892's Gulf in the Year 2000 also predicted women taking on masculine roles in future societies. An even earlier story, Samuel Madden's Memoirs of the 20th Century, was written in 1733 and features an angel who travels back from the 1990s with letters explaining what the world is like. The work focuses on diplomatic affairs of the late 20th century world, which was dominated by a Jesuit pope. Plenty of well-known authors dabbled in time travel stories throughout the 19th century. Hans Christian Andersen, Edgar Allan Poe, Mark Twain, and Charles Dickens all utilized some form of time travel in their works. But time travel of this variety was capricious and unpredictable, facilitated by fairies and angels, or in the case of one story by a pair of magic boots, or sometimes completely at random. The use of a machine to travel through time would come on the scene a little later. The 19th century was a time of rapid technological advancement. Steam trains, electricity, the telephone, and motion pictures changed the world in ways that would have been unimaginable just a century prior. So it's no surprise that as the century came to a close, stories that utilized devices to travel through time started emerging onto the scene. H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, published in 1895, remains the most famous 19th century work detailing the use of a machine to travel through time, but it wasn't the first. The Clock That Went Backwards was a short story written by Edward Page Mitchell in 1881. In that story, a centuries-old grandfather clock transports two cousins to 1574, to a pivotal battle between the Netherlands and Spain, and introduces a possible ancestor loop. Still, the clock in question is unreliable and is never actually used by the narrator or his cousin, instead being activated by other characters. It is technically a time machine, but without any kind of workings that the reader or the main character can discern. Other sort of time machines include the Historioscope, from an 1883 story by Eugene Mouton, which allows a person to see but not travel into the past, while a watch was used as a time machine, but only as a brief side note to the main plot of Lewis Carroll's Sylvie and Bruno, published in 1889. 2 years prior, in 1887, came Enrique Gaspar's El Anachronopete, which introduced the first proper time machine. It's a technological marvel, a giant iron box that's much bigger on the inside than on the outside. Sound familiar, Doctor Who fans? That contains amenities such as a laundry room, bathrooms, staterooms, and a kitchen that had a peculiar way of preparing food. A live chicken on an iron plate could be brought, defeathered by electric shocks, and then roasted by continuous sparks at a speed 7,200 times quicker than any common grill. Much of the first part of the story is used to explain the nature of time, lending it even greater scientific rationale. Curiously, travelers to the past de-age, unless they subject themselves to a treatment that involves a series of electric shocks. Between that and the description of the chicken, it sounds like the images we often see of Victorian-age scientific marvels featuring giant devices that emit massive electrical shocks isn't just a modern creation. Electricity itself was new and exciting back then, so it makes sense that it would feature into the science fiction of the day. The creators of El Anachronopete, along with a diverse cast that ranges from soldiers to prostitutes, embark on a series of adventures in the past. They visit Queen Isabella in 1492 and convince her to employ Christopher Columbus. They go to Pompeii in 79 BC to witness the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, and they head all the way back to the time of Noah, in the attempt to learn the secret of immortality from the centuries-old patriarch. A sudden rainstorm puts an end to that quest. But even all this is just a dream, as the creator of the time machine wakes up at the end of the story, having fallen asleep during a play written by another giant of 19th century science fiction, Jules Verne. H.G. Wells had actually written a short story about time travel, The Chronic Argonauts, in 1888. Fragments of that work formed the basis for The Time Machine, published in 1895. In addition to popularizing time travel, the novel also made popular the notion of a split between futuristic human societies, with an isolated upper class feeding on the lower class, sometimes figuratively, sometimes literally. With rapid industrialization and the widening gap between bosses and workers in the 19th century, it's likely that this idea took root as much as the novel's more fantastical elements. Which brings me to wonder, why did time travel stories take so long to get going? Many time travel stories had a morality element to them. You visited the future and saw how society had progressed, which might make you reflect on the current state of things and maybe try to change them yourself. Or you visited the past and saw why the good things we have now are the way they are, and how that groundwork was laid. Maybe some medieval writer came up with similar stories that have been lost to time, but I can also see a reason why time travel stories only became truly popular in the early modern era. If you were a peasant in ye olden days, you probably did the same work your parents and grandparents did, and assumed that your children and grandchildren would do the same work you were doing. Similarly, if you were of the nobility, you came from a long and distinguished lineage and generally figured that your realm and bloodline would go on forever. So there wasn't really much of a need or desire for anyone to look to the past or the future and speculate on how things could be different. It took the early modern era, and some potential for social change and mobility, as well as the awareness that some things should change, for people to look back and see how much things had improved, or how they might be improved upon in the future. As with any stories, tales about time travel reflect our current society. Things aren't perfect now, but they're generally better than they were a century or two ago, and so our stories about time travel have adapted to be more entertaining than educational. In the future, they'll probably stray even further from their moralistic predecessors, but that's a story to tell at a later time. Thank you so much for watching this video about the history of time travel. Feel free to give it a like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me what you liked or to suggest a topic for a future video. Until next time, please remember to use your time machines for good, and not just to take selfies with Napoleon or Abraham Lincoln.